The 1990s New York Knicks. The 1990s Phoenix Suns. The 1990s Utah Jazz. The Buffalo Bills of the same era. The 2000s Phoenix Suns. Sacramento Kings. And maybe the 2017, 18, 19 Houston Rockets. Sometimes almost is as good as it gets for you. It's the Will Cain Show on ESPN Radio, the ESPN app, SiriusXM Channel 80, and on ESPN News, presented by Progressive Insurance. You can always join the conversation, 888-729-3776 on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. According to The Athletic, in the wake of the Houston Rockets being dismissed from the playoffs once again by the Golden State Warriors, there was a war of words, an altercation in the locker room after the game. The war of words was between James Harden and Chris Paul, and it was about who has control, who distributes the ball, and the style of play the Rockets are playing. Shams Charania, the guy writing that column at The Athletic, was on Spain and Fitz last night, and here's what he had to say.
The dynamic between them was so great because Chris Paul is fine being vocal. Like James Harden has had his vocal moments as well, and I think this was one of them that they had together behind the scenes. And they had tense moments throughout the game where I think just how the ball was moving, how the game was going. You know, they believe in their heart of hearts they should have won that Game 6 and they should have won that series. So anytime you lose a game like that, anytime you lose a series like that, there's going to be emotion. And I think that's what you saw spill out. And I think over the long run, it should make them better. I think they should come back, you know, in the offseason and work with the coaching staff, work with the players, and figure out a way to make things better and make things happen.
Now, Stephen A. Smith reported this morning that he spoke to several Houston Rockets on a conference call, and they all rejected the veracity of this report. But yeah, it was tense. It was tense during the game, but there was nothing in the locker room after the game or going into the offseason that drove these players apart. That they're fine. The Rockets are fine. But are they capped out? The Houston Rockets, led by Mike D'Antoni, are once again out of the playoffs at the hands of the Golden State Warriors. And is this as good as it gets for this Rockets team? How can they get better? What path forward is there for the Rockets to improve the ceiling on this team? For one, Stephen A. Smith suggested this morning on First Take, the Rockets would need to make a coaching change. They need to fire Mike D'Antoni. Now, Mike D'Antoni has had another team that met a similar cul-de-sac in its growth. His Phoenix Suns teams twice made it to the Western Conference Finals, and then another time were dispatched in the Western Conference semifinals. Those Suns were a good team, but they were not a title team. Steve Nash, Amari Stoudemire, Sean Marion, a very good team. A two-time MVP in Steve Nash on that team, not unlike James Harden and what the Rockets are putting together right now. So is Mike D'Antoni at fault? Is it Mike D'Antoni that is the ultimate limitation on this team? Is he like guys like Jerry Sloan with the Jazz or Rick Adelman, who led the Trailblazers as far as they could go in the early 90s, or George Karl, who did it with the Sonics in the 90s and again with the Nuggets? Can he make a team good but not quite good enough? I don't think that's the answer. I don't think D'Antoni's the problem. I would compare Mike D'Antoni to Don Nelson. I think he's getting more out of this team than what they are. I don't think he is accomplishing less with that roster than what it adds up to. I think he's giving them more. I think they are overachieving because of Mike D'Antoni and because of his system. And I have to wonder if this is just what the Rockets are. This is just how good they are. And there's no real long-term shame in that. There's also no glory, but I rattled off a list of teams. Think about the good teams in the past, like the Knicks in the 90s, like Charles Barkley's Suns in the 90s. Hell, one of the best ever and couldn't get over the hump. Karl Malone and John Stockton's Utah Jazz. The Sacramento Kings with Chris Webber and Mike Bibby. These were teams that were great, but not quite great enough. How about the Sonics? Remember the Sonics? Sean Kemp, Kendall Gill, Gary Payton. They're good. It's not as good as the Bulls. The Blazers in the early 90s, Clyde Drexler, good, but not good enough. Is that not what the Rockets are? You know who was like that? The Toronto Raptors, until recently. In fact, that might be the model. That might be the one path out of this cul-de-sac for the Houston Rockets. The one team they might be able to look to and say, hey, there's some sliver of light in this dark corridor where we hit a dead end. There's a way through. The Toronto Raptors. Here's the sliver of light. Here's the model that the Raptors provide to the Rockets. You got to make a big move. If you've seen your ceiling, you got to shake it up. That's what, no matter how this season turns out for the Raptors, I respect that they were willing to go there and willing to do that, and they have raised their ceiling. The deal for Kawhi Leonard is an absolute success. The Rockets have to consider similar drastic moves. I don't think that's firing Mike D'Antoni. But here's one suggestion. How about Kevin Love from the Cleveland Cavaliers? How about adding a guy like Kevin Love to James Harden and Chris Paul? It may cost you a young player. It may cost you a guy like Clint Capella, who, when it comes to the playoffs, hasn't been what he was in the regular season. But the Cavs have to figure out what they're going to do with Kevin Love. He doesn't fit their timeline. Make a trade. Make a trade for a guy like Kevin Love, because if you don't, Rockets, do you know who you end up being like? How about this? You may not be the Sonics. You may not be the Jazz. You've never even been to an NBA Finals. If you don't make a deal with the Cavs for Kevin Love, you may be the Cavs of the 90s. You may be the 92, 93, 94 Cavs. Brad Daugherty, Mark Price Cavs, the ones that couldn't get past the finals, the Eastern Conference Finals, the semis, the ones that couldn't get past the Bulls. That's who the Rockets are a threat of turning into.